you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do. All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Heidi, and I'm joined by the wonderful Sarah.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. I
don't know if I believe you.
I'm a little tired. It's early in the week, and I'm also tired because this weekend was the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. And so I had people over for the Super Bowl, and even though on the West Coast it airs earlier in the day, I still, I didn't go to bed at a super early time because people linger, which is fine.
Right.
It's fine if you want to linger. It was a Sunday night,
Yeah. And then you have to get up and go to work the next day.
Yep. And then it was Monday.
Most people I talked to said the game was boring. Now, I stayed home. My husband went to a Super Bowl party. I stayed home and reorganized our garage.
The antithesis of watching the Super Bowl.
I feel okay about that. But yeah, lots of people said it was boring. Then I've heard other people say it wasn't boring. It was just well played in terms of defense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big football fan. I really only watch the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. But I know enough about football where I can watch it and kind of know what's going on. But I mean, it was like the lowest scoring game of all of the NFL history. Mm-hmm. There was just a lot of defense. So it was a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, when I was watching the Super Bowl, I kept thinking about sports safety because it's just giant, massive people running into each other and falling and just getting hit in the head and being clotheslined and
I mean, there was one injury. I can't even think of the guy's name. Anybody who's a sports fan will know what I'm talking about, though. It was this season, and the 5 minutes of football I watched this season, his ankle bent in three different directions. It was horrible.
Oh,
and
that hurts.
Yeah.
Ugh. Yeah. I mean, because I think about that, especially in football, other sports too, massive injuries. Mm-hmm. But I just think football because people are so big and just running into each other.
And they talk about it so much with CTE and everything, And,
yes.
But even without the head injuries, there's so many things that can happen in football as ankles.
Yeah. Oof. Like ankles. Or ankles that are just gone now.
Right.
So I guess the reason I bring that up is because I want to talk about the injuries of football, specifically head injuries, because I think a lot about concussions, because those are something that I feel people who, even if you don't play football, can experience, or young athletes or not super famous athletes, but I feel even a bike accident or as a kid, tripping and falling or on the playground, incidences that happen with concussions. And then I also want to talk about how the NFL deals with concussions and some of the more recent discussions, like you were saying with CTE, and other things related to football, health and safety and helmets and things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I just want to get into that, but I want to start by talking about what concussions are. Just so we can understand what we're talking about. A concussion is a type of traumatic brain injury, or TBI for short. It's usually caused by a bump or a blow or jolt to the head or a hit to the body that causes the head and brain to move rapidly back and forth.
Wow.
Which sounds
awful.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw a diagram where it's you can see what it's going on inside your head, and it's basically your brain just hitting the inside of your head, which sounds awful. And this sudden movement can cause the brain to bounce around or even twist in the skull, and it can create chemical changes in the brain, and it can sometimes stretch and damage brain cells.
Wow.
Which, I mean, yeah, if you're in a really traumatic, like sudden movement, everything in your body is just not going to be happy about it.
You know, I feel like we talk about concussions, and maybe it's, we know a lot more, obviously. But, you know, growing up, you'd hit your head and people would be like, well, just wake them up every hour, make sure they don't have a concussion or whatever. And now I've got a friend who had a concussion a few months ago, and she actually ended up, it didn't even seem like it was that bad of an injury. I think she got hit playing soccer, which is not good, but didn't sound like it was too horrible. But she was in the hospital. They had like noise canceling headphones. She had to be in the dark, and then she was on bed rest for a month. I mean, so we definitely think about concussions differently than we used to. And when you really think about what it is, when your brain can twist, we need to be careful with our brains.
That can't be good.
No.
Yeah, and it is interesting you bring that up because I feel like it is changing like how we view concussions. But I feel like a lot of medical providers still describe concussions as mild brain injuries because they're not like usually they're not life-threatening.
Right.
Or at least you don't directly die from a concussion.
Right.
But the effects of a concussion can be really serious as like a severe blow to the head can cause lasting traumatic brain injury.
Right. And I suppose, one concussion maybe it's not as bad. Maybe you could consider it mild, even though it sounds terrible. But then the more you get, and that's part of the conversation with football is that they keep hitting. I mean, they use their heads as
exactly.
battering rams.
Right. Or even like in soccer, you use your head to like headbutt the ball. Not good. So with concussions, I just want to go and mention some of the common symptoms of them. And this is actually from the NFL player concussion pamphlet, which is interesting, I guess. That's how common it is.
I don't know why that makes me laugh. I'm just picturing really big, bulky football players like in the locker room and somebody going around handing them this little pamphlet
tiny
saying,
pamphlet.
Please read this.
Yeah. This is an interesting, I guess I don't know. I don't think about concussions that much, but there can be a lot of symptoms of concussions and a lot of things that can result, like imbalance, headache, obviously, confusion, memory loss, loss of consciousness, vision change, hearing change, mood change, fatigue, or I want to say this is
malaise.
Malaise? Okay. And malaise is generally a feeling of like overall weakness. It can be a feeling of discomfort, just a feeling like you have an illness or just not feeling well. And it often occurs with like coincides with like fatigue and inability to restore a feeling of health, even through proper rest, which does not sound good.
Yeah.
And all of those things make sense when I think about, like, I also had a friend who had a concussion and things like that. Like, a lot of times you're suggested to have bed rest after a concussion and just to, like, take it easy, not do any, like, sudden movements and to rest. Because these are all symptoms of things that you would think, like, okay, just some bed rest and you'll recover, which, again, is why concussions are not considered, they are considered, like, a mild brain injury. Because you can, like, recover through rest, and most of the time you are fine. Again, as we were saying, unless you're having them all the time, hence sports.
Right.
So there are many ways that you can help reduce the risk of a concussion or other serious brain injury. And these can kind of be like on or off the sports field. For example, one of the things is you want to make sure that you're always wearing the right helmet for your activity and that it fits correctly. So, like, there's a bike helmet, but then there's also, like, a horseback riding helmet or, different types of helmets for different types of activities. And wearing a helmet can help reduce the risk of a serious brain injury or skull fracture or whatever. But helmets are not necessarily designed to prevent concussions, and there is no concussion-proof helmet.
Right.
And there is a lot of technology right now that is improving to, like, make helmets better for concussion prevention. And there is a lot that's going on where I feel like a lot of doctors want to try and prevent concussions or track if they think someone had a concussion, which is very important because sometimes people may not realize they've had a concussion, or a lot of times, especially young athletes, will try and just like walk it off and like not report the symptoms,
Right.
because they don't want to stop playing or they don't want to come off the sports field and things like that. So there is, I think, as awareness of concussions and the seriousness of it increases, there's like more technology being created to improve how we track concussions and particularly how we construct helmets. Which makes sense. I mean, if you're thinking about ways to, well, like what can stand in the way between a really bad concussion and, not a really bad one, is what you put on your head, since
Right.
it is a head injury.
Just makes me think of, the earliest football players and those little caps they wore, which I'm sure didn't do anything.
That just keeps
Or
like the hair out of your eyes.
the fact that, I grew up riding a bike without a helmet, and people rode motorcycles without helmets all the time, and just things have changed.
Yeah, I mean, granted, people didn't used to drive with seatbelts, so
Yeah, right. Yeah.
we've improved in society in general safety and how important we view those things. And before we go, I want to take a break. But before we do, I just want to mention there is a really great filter out there. And a lot of people, specifically dealing with health, have a lot of respiratory problems, or maybe you know someone who has asthma, or maybe you have asthma, or just, allergies can be really brutal going on, especially as we approach spring. So right now going on, there are HEPA filters, which are what we all know, but they were developed during like the Second World War. So there's a company out there called Molecule, which has introduced this new breakthrough science that in your air filters that is finally capable of destroying air pollutants at a molecular level. So the filter doesn't just capture what's in the air, it destroys it. And one customer who uses this has even said that she was able to breathe through her nose for the first time in 15 years, which is amazing.
Yes, it is.
So if you want to look into this filter, if you want to get a great deal, there's an offer going on right now, which is $75 off your first order. To get this deal, go to molecule.com, that is MOLEKULE, and at checkout, enter the promo code GSMC Health. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back and keep talking about concussions.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome back to the Health and Wellness Podcast. We are continuing to talk about concussions. And as we mentioned before the break, there are ways that you can try and reduce the risk of concussions or other serious brain injuries.
I say just wrap yourself in bubble wrap and don't leave the house.
Yeah, just never go out, probably. Or be around sharp corners or...
That brings up many other health issues if you're never leaving the house or getting off your couch. So don't really do that.
True. That could be other things.
Yeah.
That'll be a different episode.
Okay.
But on this one, I want to mention, along with making sure that you wear a helmet to stay safe, there are actions that parents can do that really make a big difference for kids that are involved in sports. Because as I said, a lot of these injuries, concussions, and other head injuries can come related to sports or riding your bike or other things. But if you particularly have kids in sports, it can be really important for parents to make a safe sports culture for their kids and for the other kids on the teams and just who participate. And this can lower an athlete's chance of getting a concussion or other serious injury. And it's important for parents to support their young athletes and just to make sure that there's an environment where kids feel that they can have fun playing their sport and also receive positive messages and praises from their coaches if they have a concussion symptom, and that way they feel comfortable reporting it and they don't want to just hide it and maybe they're embarrassed by feeling sick or something. And it's also important to have parents talk with their kids about concussions and to kind of model and expect safe play, so you're not encouraging head injuries or something.
Right.
Not encouraging just
or
head bashing.
you jokingly said walk it off earlier, but there are some parents out there who are like, "Oh, you're fine," and you gotta consider the health of your child.
Right, exactly. The long-term health and just attitudes that your kids can get from that of oh, it's fine if I'm sick. I'm just not going to tell anyone.
Right.
And also, sorry.
They're not, you model it for your kid, and then your kid treats his or her teammates poorly because that's what's been modeled for them.
Yeah, exactly. You need to create a whole environment for everyone involved. And also, you should get written instruction from a healthcare provider on like when to return to school or when to return to the sport if your kid does have a diagnosed concussion. It's important to seek medical attention and to then kind of let the health provider tell you when they can go back out and play.
Right.
And also, like you mentioned, Sarah, it's important for teammates to support each other and not like be harsh on other kids if they say they might have a concussion or are feeling sick or something. It's important that they support each other. And just that they feel comfortable reporting symptoms of concussions to like coaches and other people who are, participating, maybe other parents even. And I think also related to making sure kids can play fair and aren't like doing actions that would encourage concussions or things like that. Like usually that relates to rules and that there are rules that are enforced and just in general that concussion reporting is encouraged. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think like that's important for parents. And also I really do feel like we as a society are growing to accept like saying when you're hurt or like when you're in pain or when you feel sick or things like that. Like,
right.
It's important to encourage that for everyone's health,
right.
And also for the fair play of the game.
Yep. We're as a society though, we're weird. We've been weird. Just the way we talk about injuries and, it's very sort of sexistly, that's not a word, but divided on kind of like sexist lines where man up and all those phrases.
Yeah.
I have a friend who growing up, his dad said if there's no blood you can't cry, so he broke his arm once and didn't cry because there was no blood, but a paper cut and the kid would just have a freaking meltdown because there was blood. And so it's just interesting the way we talk to our kids, we model things for our kids. And those can have long-term effects.
Yeah, for sure. Also, this was something that I didn't think about. I don't know why I didn't think about this. It makes sense. But like if someone has a concussion, it's important to have an action plan in place. And I feel this would be particularly important for parents or like really coaches anywhere. For any sport, it's important that you have an action plan if something happens, and it's important that the action plan that is created includes information on how to teach athletes to lower their chances of getting a concussion. And if you think an athlete may have a concussion, there are a few things that should be done. Firstly, you should remove the athlete from play. And you should keep like the athlete with a possible concussion out of play on the same day of the injury until they're cleared by a health professional. Mm-hmm. And like don't try and like judge the severity of the injury by yourself until
right.
like someone in the medical field has been able to assess the athlete.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely important. Also, you might want to like record and share information about the injury, like how it happened or what the symptoms are, things like that, when you bring that person to a healthcare provider. When they're, trying to assess if that person has a concussion, you probably want to be able to tell them what happened and, all the things surrounding the injury. Also, if you're like a coach and you're not the athlete's parent, you'll want to inform their parent or guardian about a possible concussion and like tell them like information about concussions and like what they should know, how to care for their kid. Also, you want to get written instruction from the athlete's healthcare provider about steps that you can take to like safely return an athlete to play, all before you just return them to the field.
Right. I would hope that most schools, community centers, whatever group is putting on the sport or in charge of I would hope that they would all have policies like this in place.
Yeah.
We tend to have policies for everything. Which is a good thing sometimes, but I would hope that anyone who is in charge of youth sports would have something like this in place and not just be like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
I suppose
I would
that's
hope
possible, but
if you're listening and if this isn't something that you have and you're involved in sports, or maybe you're just interested and you're like, oh, I haven't thought about that. I wonder if, my kid's sports team does have these type of things and are aware of them.
But it makes me think of even things like where you wouldn't necessarily, like sports, obviously, there's organized sports, there's probably something in place. But think of like day camps where your kid's going, maybe not, maybe it's just an arts camp or something or that they are in the summer, but there's usually some active part. I've actually put these camps on for a number of years, and I'm thinking, we didn't have a concussion plan in place or anything like that, but it's, a kid can hit their head on anything.
Yeah, very true.
So just something to be aware of if you are in charge of children in any way.
Yeah,
is
definitely.
to have some kind of plan in place for these things.
Right. It's very important. And also related to like getting instruction from a healthcare provider before returning before returning an athlete to play. You also, as a parent, should be aware of that before returning your kid to like regular school activities or just other normal green, like everyday activities. It's just important to know and get a healthcare provider green light for that. So that's talking about concussions with like children and other athletes, but I do want to mention concussions and their relation to the NFL. Because, you know, it's something that we mentioned at the very beginning of the podcast. When you're dealing with big football players, and especially in a sports organization that is so large, like dealing with concussions and head injuries comes up a lot. And it was something that for a very long time was considered, you know, like it's a mild head injury. You don't have to like think about it too much.
But if you look at a lot of older people who have played the NFL, there's some serious health issues going on with some of them.
Yes. And reports have shown, like, as you were saying, just increasing number of retired NFL players and those specifically who suffered concussions, they can develop memory and cognitive issues such as dementia, Alzheimer's, depression. We mentioned CTE, which is chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
Whatever.
Yeah, CTE.
I'm sure there's
once
I'd
better
heard it,
way.
when I heard it said, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's how you pronounce that.
That's how I feel about a lot of things. Oh yeah, that's how it is. I knew that. Well, we're going to call it CTE. And CTE is a brain degenerative disease, and it's often found in athletes or military veterans or just others with a history of like repetitive brain trauma. And CTE is really controversial and misunderstood, but it is believed that a protein called tau forms and clumps and like slowly spreads throughout the brain, and it actually can kill brain cells. And symptoms include depression, aggression, and disorientation. And scientists can definitively diagnose it only after death.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
I'm not getting on you, science. It's just not helpful.
Yeah,
I mean, hopefully someday we'll figure out a better way to diagnose before death.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, that's what a lot of the problem is, and what is misunderstood about the disease is if someone is alive, then they could have it. We don't necessarily know. You could just be treating them for depression when really they have a different disease. Right. Which is always that's not good when you're misdiagnosing things, and you really will never be able to diagnose it until after death. Yeah. That does not provide good closure for people. We're going to take a quick break, but before we go into that break, I want to mention again this really great filter that is by Molecule, and it is a filter that is unlike other HEPA filters. It doesn't just trap the pollutants and dirt and other things in the air. It actually is a breakthrough science that can destroy the air pollutants at a molecular level. Again, this can really help people breathe better, those who are just chronic sufferers of asthma or other respiratory problems. And Molecule's technology has been personally effective and verified by science, but most importantly, it's been tested by real people. Molecule has already helped allergy and asthma sufferers around the country better cope with their conditions and significantly reduce their symptoms. If you want to get into a great offer for this filter, right now you can get $75 off your first order. And to get this, visit molecule.com, which is MOLEKULE.com. And at checkout, enter the promo code GSMC Health. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back and keep talking about concussions and the NFL.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast. We are continuing to talk about concussions, and specifically we are talking about concussions and its relation, and the NFL's relationship with concussions. We talked about before the break CTE, which is a degenerative disease that unfortunately can really only be diagnosed after death. And that can happen, CTE can happen related to concussions and just other bad traumatic brain injuries. And also, there has been growing concern about concussions. It's been going on slowly, but I want to mention that this growing concern has been starting since the early 1900s. And in 1906, a Harvard student athlete died from a head injury.
In 1906, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay, just double checking that I heard that right.
And yes, you did. And team doctors released a report titled "The Physical Aspect of American Football" in the Boston Medical and Surgical Journal. And they described the type, severity, and number of injuries the team sustained in the 1905 season.
And did they recommend they stop wearing those stupid little caps?
That would have been really revolutionary. I feel like at that point, though, they would have been like, well, what else do we wear? There's probably an amount of time before they came up with something besides little, like, leather swim caps as a solution. Which really just makes your team look, like, cohesive. That was its only purpose.
Pretty much.
And so there has been, since that time, interest in concussions has grown in the NFL. But again, like, they just wrote a report about, like, the physical aspects of football. They weren't, like, trying to, like, talk about, don't do it or be careful.
Right.
They just, like, observed it. And they were recording multiple injuries from the team, just that team.
Just that team, right.
So there must have been a lot of injuries.
I guess all these studies and things have to start somewhere.
True. Yeah, and I feel like they were definitely just saying, like, yeah, football, it's dangerous.
Right, in hindsight, we're like, duh.
Yeah, someone died. It could happen. Also, the NFL began to review the subject formally, the subject of concussions, in 1994. So that was not that long ago.
All right.
Then NFL Commissioner Paul Tagliabue?
Sure.
Okay.
I don't know.
He approved the creation of the Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Committee with the stated goals of studying the effects of concussions.
They called it the Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Committee?
Yep. MTBI Committee.
I don't know why I find that funny, but I do.
That's a sexy name. Yeah, that's kind of a mouthful. Spines are always so many acronyms. And this studied the effects of concussions and subconcussive injury in NFL players. So, they started studying it officially. And the concussion data collected by the league from 1996 to 2001 has been shown to understate the actual number of diagnosed concussions by 10%. Mm-hmm. The league,
I have heard that.
Yeah, it's not good. The league legal representation has been shown to have had ties to the tobacco industry as well and their legal defense, which is really interesting and definitely potentially insidious if their legal team being connected to the legal team that we all greatly dislike, the tobacco industry, of saying like, oh, no, that's not that big of a deal, all of these concussions, or just not reporting them as much as they should be. In July 2017, a study published in the medical journal identifies CTE in 99% of deceased NFL players' brains that had been donated to scientific research.
Right, but still, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I'm sure if you were donating that for research, you probably had an inkling that was going on anyway, but
right.
99%.
I mean, it's not like they can just say, okay, once you die, every NFL player has to have an autopsy so we can see if you...
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Also in 2017, researchers published in the Journal of Neurosurgery what they say is the first case of a living person identified with CTE. So they're saying that this is the first case of someone who's alive because they can definitively know when someone's dead, but apparently this is when someone's alive.
So did they figure out a new way to determine if they have it when they're alive? I'm intrigued by that.
I don't know.
I don't know if I'm intrigued, but I'm maybe confused by that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I believe they confirmed that to news outlets. And the subject of the case, this case was unnamed in the study. But former NFL player Fred McNeil, who died in 2015, I guess they also diagnosed him as definitively of having CTE with a brain exam after death. So I don't know. I feel like they were trying to say it might have been him, and we knew before he passed. But I don't know. I'm interested to see. I should probably read that study in more detail, but just to see, like, this is how we figured it out. I mean, there are symptoms, but again, the symptoms are pretty vague, so they could be some other type of disease, unfortunately. Also, the NFL, there are current efforts by the NFL in regards to concussions. The league announced that concussions were apparently down 29% in 2018 from 190 a year to 135 this season. I mean, that's hopeful. Again, I would hope that that's not just lobbying, convincing them to say that.
Right. But I know there still is a lot of, I don't know if stigma is the right word exactly, but, you know, they do have concussion protocol in place, but I know that there's a lot of, like, reluctance to, you know, they don't want to be labeled as having a concussion because then you have to go through the concussion protocol. So
and then you can't play.
I feel like a lot of people, or there's ways around it still that players and coaches and who knows who else are trying to kind of do that loophole.
I agree. Yeah. And I think that is related to, you know, I'm sure unreported cases. Also, Dr. Robert Knight, who is a Berkeley neurology doctor, he has spent a lot of time testing what he calls a game-changing helmet for football players. And he said that the principle is simple, that they want to get force away from the skull. And the solution to that is to have a two-shell helmet. And they said it's the front of the brain that's absorbing the brunt of the problem. So they're creating multiple layers around the brain as to avoid, I guess, like the impact. And apparently the inner shell is like strapped and then the outer shell moves, and it moves whether if you are hit in the front, in the back, or in the side. So it's omnidirectional. And every time that moves, there's a mechanism that connects the outer to the inner shell, which absorbs some of the energy. And so there's less energy from impact that's going to the brain.
I wonder, though, like I'm obviously not an expert on football or helmets or, you know, brain injuries. But they've developed so much as you look at the evolution of helmets in football. I'm always amazed they can see anything at all except for straight in front of them. I
feel like they'd be so heavy.
Right. And then this sounds great, but again, I wonder how heavy it is, and does it impede your vision?
Right.
I mean, well, no, I don't know if I'd rather not be able to see than have a concussion. There's a trade-off in there that I don't know if it's worth it, but
yeah, I mean, I feel like I could see that, just getting a bigger helmet and just being more like a bobblehead. That wouldn't be good. The Dr. Knight and his team are hoping that this double-shelled helmet can go beyond just football, and they're looking for prototypes for hockey, biking, and baseball. And helmets, they are a multi-billion-dollar business for, you know, all the sports that need helmets. But that hasn't really mitigated the spread of serious brain diseases from trauma to the head. I feel like despite how big the business is, that doesn't necessarily mean, you know, we're going to immediately reduce it. But there is, you know, a lot of patents and things going on for different helmets, and particularly Dr. Knight's. And so they're hoping that more research and crash testing can help them examine, you know, how to better make a helmet and hopefully how to protect other athletes and those who use helmets.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah, we can hope.
We seem to be heading in the right direction, at least.
Heading.
Yeah, totally planned that.
Yes, we can hope. So thank you all so much for listening. That brings us to the end of the episode, and please tune in to the next Health and Wellness podcast.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Health and Wellness Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.